Hey everyone, welcome to our World Today, the Unionist Perspective. We're very happy to have you. Today we are going to talk about, I think, quite a few topics, like at least 3 or 4, that we felt were relevant for this week. And they are on boundaries and sensitivity. Now, it may feel like a very spiritual topic or very emotional, but these are actually things that we observed in politics this week, in politics throughout the US and within the relationships of people with usually the states. Would you say like the states? How do you say it's like, although as a federal state and that there is like I don't know what level this is, but yeah, the different states, especially like Mississippi and Tennessee. So yeah, we're going to dive right into it. Maybe talk a little bit about what happened in the past 10 days, because it was a lot. And then just talk about how we feel about it and if there is any healing for us to do. Oh, yeah, also there is a topic on like Trump's indictment, and a topic on like the US and the UK walking out on Russia's envoy in a discussion. So yeah, there is quite a lot of sensitive discussions and topics. So let's get right into it. How do you guys feel? What do you guys feel the first topic should be?
I wanted to hear Andia's perspective, since you're like an expert in criminal justice, about what was going on with Jackson, Mississippi. If you had any thoughts about that, or if that was an area that was related to things that you've heard about or studied. Yeah.
Actually, when I read that article, it didn't surprise me that they were using crime as a sort of justification for like creating the new district and like the new police force. Because in my opinion, like a big problem with our criminal justice system is the fact that it is so politicized, and so much of our social policies, unfortunately, are influenced by politicians. And crime is always used as like a thing that you need to be like tough on. Like, politicians use that line consistently, like from, I feel like the 70s, 80s to now. It's just been used as propaganda, in my opinion, to, kind of make people feel unsafe without like really understanding why it is we experience crime in our society, like from a sociological, criminological level. And so it is frustrating as, someone who is in academia and dedicates a lot of my energy into doing research and understanding the reasons why people commit crime in the first place. And it's never like they present it, as politicians present it. It's always, in the most simplest form, it's like a social adaptation to bad external situations. Now, there's some people that like use it as a form of coping too with trauma, especially women. Like a lot of women engage in crime for those reasons. But the fact that like in Mississippi, they're using the justification of creating a whole new police force because crime rates are going up. It's just like a total lie. Like I think we mentioned in the chat, like there's definitely like a feeling of deception because even in that article, it was pointed out that so many of those districts actually have low crime rates. They're not areas that are experiencing high crime. But as criminologists, we know that like poverty and crime are two things that are usually related to one another. And if you address the issue, which really at its core is people not being able to, or they feel like they cannot support themselves in like legitimate ways. And so there's always like an adaptation to something illegitimate. And there's never a focus on that. Like that is my frustration with what is going on in Mississippi. And even with like the Tennessee story, I feel like there is the same sort of energy. It's just like people, you know, people with privilege that are able to make these decisions, just using it as a form of social control and further marginalizing places that historically have been marginalized in the past, especially like Mississippi. You can't forget that it's like a slave state that, you know, for so long they've had issues with like segregation and slavery, and you know, it's a very big part of like the South. And so these southern states especially, it seems like a lot of the criminal justice policies harken back to those days where police forces were developed literally to control freed slaves. That was like their main mission. But not a lot of people know the history of that. And so like, they don't, like the public doesn't realize the BS that is like surrounding all these justifications, especially that one, because like, I don't know, it just stood out to me because of my background. And I'm sure there's like further political issues with, you know, doing something like that, like taking the power away from the district itself and like giving it to some outsider.
Yeah, but I think like, sorry, there are several problems with that. I'm glad you started by explaining that to us, because as a non-American can go through my process, like reading the article, and I was like, is it really Jim Crow 2.0? When I sat with it, I researched, and I was like, well, first of all, this is weird spiritually. Like having a separate police for different districts is already something weird. Maybe it's cultural, but we don't do that in France because we have like it's like the one and undivided republic, so everyone should have access to the same types of treatments. And then exactly as you started talking, I just remembered that the reason why white suburban areas exist in the United States is because they were created on the marketing, at least on the marketing side, to tell people, well, have a safe neighborhood far from the colored criminals. So I understand maybe that some people who don't know history would say, well, this is kind of, you know, you're going too deep into that. This is a Jim Crow law, like you're exaggerating, but this is actually literally the basis of how housing was created in the United States as it is right now. And also one of the reasons why when there's a housing crisis, there are so many problems because it's so separated. And even the political crisis, if you go into that modification of counties and things like that. So counties and neighborhoods are always used politically. This is how it's always been working for the past century in the United States. So it would make sense. Like, it seems like it would be the first step into going back into this civil rights movement era of separating people. on top of the fact that the police was also created to watch these Black criminals at first when Jim Crow started. So yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I also need to point out that it's, you know, the narrative around crime is so one-sided. Like it portrays like a certain type of criminal, whereas other types of crimes go totally unacknowledged by the mainstream, like domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking, white collar crime, like things that happen indoors where detection is low, like the probability of being detected is low, is not really considered crime to most people, whereas things that are visible and things that tend to exist within impoverished areas, because once again, if you're like engaging in violence, like gang violence, where you're fighting people in the streets, or you're engaging in some sort of, you know, open air market, like drug deal or whatever it is, like it's only happening because the environment which those people are embedded in are so impoverished that many people feel like these outlets are really the only way that I can survive. Like it's just survival mode. And you're right, Irene, that like so much of this stems from the sort of history of like how America developed and like how the housing and districts and counties, how all of that is like decided on. And now I feel like Americans, especially, they have this idea that crime is only concentrated among a certain group of people, and is usually like correlated with people of color and especially Black men, I would say. And so, and then like they look at the prison system, they're like, oh, look at all these Black men that are incarcerated, and they think that it's because they're like more violent or more criminal. But no, in reality, it's only because of like the way that this country developed historically. And even though like we created policies around equality and like representation, and so like I feel like on a very superficial level, America looks like the race issues are fine, but at a deeper level, I do not believe those things have been like reconciled or even like fully faced by Americans, like on a deep spiritual level. And I think that's why we continue to like perpetuate the same pattern where, you know, it's 2023, but yet our criminal justice system is like a reflection of what we did during slavery and how we responded to it. Because there's no reason why Black Americans should be overrepresented in our system, because there's no evidence that different groups of people are more criminal. But the fact that poverty and race tend to be correlated in this country is like a huge driving factor, and all like the historical stuff around it is a huge driving factor. But people see the reality and they just take it for what it is, and they just think that like, oh, Black people are more criminal than other people, but that's that's like nowhere near the truth of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you. Sorry, Sage, go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to clarify too, like with this Jackson, Mississippi thing, is it that a new court district is being created, or is it that there will be new judges in the court system that covers all of Jackson? I didn't remember that.
Oh yeah, I think the new court is the judge. Yeah, the judges will, but then they want like a new
special force,
a special police force. So yeah, the police force is something new, but yeah, you're right that the judges are, how you explained it, like just outside judges.
Yeah, replacing. And I think it was actually like the state capital police force is like already overseen by the state. It's not overseen by the city. Like it's not the city police force. It's like the state police force for like patrolling around like government buildings in downtown Jackson. That's what it used to be. But with this new law, they would have the state Capitol Police also covering some like mainly just wealthy shopping districts and wealthy, like vastly majority white suburbs. And that's why it's confusing, because I'm like, well, why do they want the state Capitol Police Force with little oversight from no oversight from the city, just from the state? That's their concern. Why are they expanding it to these like shopping districts and these suburban districts? It doesn't make sense, because that's not really, is that, I don't know. It doesn't make sense with what they're saying, because if they're saying we need to get a handle on crime in Jackson, but then they're expanding the state controlled police force to areas with the least crime, according to those definitions, right, that Andia mentioned.
Well,
It doesn't
it
make sense.
depends. Like, what's the bill going to cover? Is it going to, what are the, actions that are going to be installed inside the different forces to control the city? Because I think we have that pattern, like a lot in Europe, where like special police force or national police security would go more and more into some sort of like micro environments, in terms of like, in regards to security, just because the state is saying like, oh, this is less secure, so we need like more control. And then you would have almost like conflicts of forces, because sometimes like around like public places, you would have like private special forces, national special forces, state forces, and armies patrolling the same areas. And then all of them have an increased amount of power to do something if the situation comes to if the situation goes haywire. And I think that's linked to the fact that Jackson, Mississippi has been, as you said in the chat, going through a lot of protests and a lot of like unrest from the population. And they would just want to protect like more of the public places, or like the places where a lot of people are, just on the fact that basically it would lead to more violence or more looting or less security of these neighborhoods, which is kind of frustrating, because it's like we're taking like what happened in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, and we're making matters worse by not going to the core of the problem, but trying to control the part that the government can control by increasing some types of security or something. And I don't know, it seems confusing. And I feel like I want to go back to what Anja was saying. And I think you explained perfectly the core of polarization today. And maybe we're going to talk about it a little more with like Trump's indictment. But there is this thing of like, on the surface level, it seems very logical. Like, more colored people are incarcerated, so there is more crime in colored people in certain neighborhoods. That's it. For most people, it would be logic. But then you start to go back to, well, what's the reason for that? How is the justice system built? Who does it benefit? Like, is it neutral? Is it political? Does it go by counties? And are these counties all treated the same way? And then you realize that, first of all, they are not, and they're going to be even less if Mississippi pass this bill. And then you see people are saying that, oh, people are exaggerating and treating this as Jim Crow 2.0, but they're actually putting up boundaries. Now you understand why they're putting up boundaries, but then you understand that it may seem as very extreme to other people that say, well, logically, we don't have these problems anymore, and I feel threatened that you would feel that it's a problem, and then it goes higher and higher. This is like the core of all polarization that we're seeing in the US, but also globally. And it seems so menial at the core. It's like a misunderstanding, an illusion, an absence of knowing everything, maybe listening. So it's really about misunderstanding and communication. And I always felt that that was the case in politics. But yeah, it definitely feels frustrating that everyone is polarizing instead of trying to listen to everyone. And I have a lot of compassion, even for people that are maybe seen as far right, because I think like majority of them aren't, maybe there are like some of them that are extremes, but you know, there's probably a part of them that is just misinformed and in return feels misunderstood, because what they see is people taking actions on things that they feel should be peaceful and calm at the moment, but are not, because it's not their reality. And so it just builds resentment and feelings of abandonment on all sides. And yeah. So yeah, the boundaries are definitely needed, but there's like this subcore, I would say, of the core of polarization. It's like right there, it's so many misunderstandings that go into separation, go into treating people differently. And yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about that. That was my two piece.
Yeah, I feel like,
Sorry, go ahead, Sage.
well, I just wanted to mention, because in that article that Nadia shared in her chat, the main point being brought up was how it was about like basically oh, there's this theme in like the history in Mississippi, and I think in the South in general, of like being like there was like leadership by Black people, and then they want to like take it over and replace it with white leadership. And that is what's going on. But the thing is, nowadays they won't say it openly. They gaslight. They're gaslighting people. And I know how frustrating that can feel to experience gaslighting. They're saying that it's not racially motivated and that it's just about like Jackson, Mississippi can't handle the level of criminal cases. They're incompetent. And that's like kind of, that almost alone is a racial dog whistle. And everything. And they're saying, instead of having Jackson appoint more judges for their backlogged criminal cases, they say, well, we're just going to replace the current judges with different ones, but the same amount. I'm pretty sure it's the same amount, and they're going to be appointed by us. And they wanted to amend the bill to say only people in Jackson could be in this appointed, because some people wanted that as a compromise. And the person who authored this bill about the court takeover thing said, don't we want our best and brightest on the seat of judgment? And I'm like, dude, do you not know like Well, he does know what he's doing. He knows how that
Right,
sounds.
yeah.
But it's this slippery thing where you're not saying precisely what you mean, but you're saying it
yeah.
to appeal to like your base
Yeah.
of people, the white voters, basically.
Communication and I would say manipulation in a sense.
Yeah, and I feel like it's been that way since the end of Reconstruction, right? In the 1870s. I feel like we're just seeing the same thing on loop, but I think we shouldn't be convinced that this will never change, because that's exactly the mentality that those in those leadership positions want you to think. Oh, the South will never change. You know, they want you to believe that, but I don't think that we should hold that mentality. Anyway, that's my.
That's why there's a boundary, and as criticized as it is, it's important, and we need to keep it energetically and physically. Like we can't go back on this boundary. It's exactly like women and abortion. It's like a control of the narrative to say that they're not powerful enough to take care of their own either body or government system, judiciary system, and things like that. So you need to uphold the boundary and say, no, I'm powerful here and I'm in charge. That's not how it's going to go, because like otherwise we're going to go into powerlessness and we're going to say, oh, Mississippi is never going to change, and like going in for a new loop of like hellish behavior and even more gaslighting and even more control, because it won't stop there. It's like the thing is like the more we talk about it, the more it feels like it's just a deep hole. Like it's so much crap and it doesn't feel good. So we need to keep the boundary there.
Yeah. I feel like it's going to change though. I mean, it's going to have to eventually. Like nothing can, like it's going to reach a point where it's just so unsustainable that something's going to have to give. I don't know if we'll get to that point, but
Yeah.
I definitely like, I feel it within criminal justice at least. And you know, like I teach at a university in Texas, in Huntsville, Texas, which is like an hour outside of Houston. So not like that in the boons, but it's still pretty like in a rural area. And you know, just like and it's also very interestingly a prison town. So you have this prison town with like 8, 9 prisons, and then randomly this university. And I definitely feel like there's like this tension, at least between like the system, the correctional system within the town of, and then, you know, like the department that I teach in, because like many professors, obviously when you're trained as like a sociologist, you see things very differently than someone who works in the system. But it's like from the students, I feel like that is like the key, like the new generation of people going into the criminal justice system. Because at some point, all these old timers, they're gonna go. They can't be there, you know, forever. And there's like this energy, like there's just like this wind of change. I just like feel it every time I go on campus, every time I teach a class. Like there's something, it's like, and it's like God wants it, like the land wants it. I feel it so like deep in my soul. Like there's something that's going to change in this area. And I really feel like it's just this new generation of people coming in, because thankfully there are a lot of, you know, people that teach criminal justice in a very critical way, because only so long can you hide the truth, and it's going to be exposed no matter what. And so I feel like it's starting to become more commonplace that like mass incarceration is a huge problem, and it, you know, the legacy of slavery and how that plays a role. And you know, you're always going to have people that resist you, but I feel like there is this desire within the newer generation to like really see the truth and like try to do things differently. And I don't know how long it's going to take to actually affect the system, but it's not going to be like this forever. And I always think I relate it to my own healing process, because sometimes like God takes you to some like really dark, low places where you feel like you just like hit rock bottom and you're like, I have no idea who I am. What am I doing? What is happening? And I kind of feel the same way in terms of like just like how we're going about certain social policies. Like you have to just like be in a really dark place for a while for it to like get better. And I feel like we're reaching that point, at least in terms of like the crime stuff and just like the political, I don't know so much about the political divide, but I think more so about in terms of the crime stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, and maybe it's because you're in the deep of teaching about the problem. I feel like there's already a wind of change. Like the Mississippi people, like in the state, like they're standing up for their rights. And I feel like maybe going into what's happening in Tennessee, 10,000 kids were at the basis of this movement, and the Tennessee Free that didn't back down. And now one of them, like I think it's Justin, I don't remember its last name, sorry, the lawyer, the first lawyer, Justin, was reinstated in the House of Tennessee after being expelled. And they're not backing down at all, and they're holding their boundaries, and it's working. Maybe it's working just a little bit at the moment, but it's still a big win for me. So, like, we're head deep in healing, but I still feel like it's changing. I want to say that it was so good to have these 10,000 kids just standing up. It was so weird that representative would be scared of 12 years old being like encircled by security and saying like this is like unruly, even though like the kids had a right to be there and protest because this is democracy. And their response was expelling people. It's like a fear response. And so the truth cannot be hidden, because how can you explain that people will be so scared of 12 years olds and 3 representatives just standing there and chatting with them to the point that they would expel people, instead of looking at and going back to the core of the problem again, that feels like it's always being avoided. These kids are experiencing like an amount of mass shootings that should never be experienced by anyone. Like we have a whole generation of kids and college students right now that are traumatized just by big sounds because they feel like they can't go anywhere without fearing a mass shooting in the United States. And so, again, misunderstanding or not wanting to hear, actually. What if, like, they said, like, we're going to discuss with you, and they would stop chanting, and they would have sat at the House of Representatives in Tennessee and just had a discussion. It doesn't mean that they're going to agree. Like, we know that a lot of the politicians are taking money probably from the gun lobby, but just the fact that of not choosing love in this place to the point where we can't even hear a kid saying that I fear for my life, even though you're the one that's saying that we need to protect the lives of these kids in other instances, and I have kids, I'm worried about them. Well, your kid is in school right now, in danger. And that reminds me, I didn't like send this to you guys, but I saw a TikTok where a Fox News reporter, or maybe I sent this to you, a Fox News reporter was reporting a mass shooting at a high school. And when the kids had the right to go home, her son like ran into her arms live on TV, and she had to excuse herself because she was like, I'm sorry, I didn't know if he was okay, but at the same time, it was updating me of the situation as we were talking. Like, I'm sorry, you have to understand, I'm a mother. Like, this isn't a political debate. Like, this is Fox News, and this is a mom that was worried about a son. It's not political, it's about human lives. And I think that's the core of things. Like the misunderstanding is that it's going to be political, it's going to be unruly, it's going to be about protest, it's going to be about violence, and we need to protect ourselves from this. But no, people are just saying like, protect our lives, respect us. And that's a boundary that's being upheld. Like, are we seeing things correctly? Are we wanting to see things correctly? Are we wanting to hear it? Yeah.
I always wonder why all these like human rights issues are politicized so much in America. And like, are other countries like this, or is it just the US? Because I feel
other
like every
countries,
simple thing, it's just like,
I think
Well,
other countries are like this, but not in the same way. Maybe not in such a appealing, extreme way.
yeah, I think it's all different, but I think it's just no surprise because in the US, like slavery was only outlawed like in 1863. That's not long ago. How long ago is that? That's like 160 years ago. Yeah, 160 exactly. Well, almost exactly. So that's really not a lot of time actually, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really no surprise because just a handful of generations ago, like in the US, it was people were legally considered property. And I mean, but I feel like I agree with what you're saying. Like there are analogous issues in every country almost, or different. The energy can show up in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like in the US, it always shows up as like this like a basic necessity is politicized.
Because there was resistance to it.
Yeah.
Like all these bills passed to kind of slow down some things. Like I remember like I had American history about religions and ethnicities in college, and it was like, well, at the beginning, people were moving fast. And actually, the Democrats were not on the same political spectrum as we were right now, and Republicans either. It's changed afterwards, and then there were laws passed because they didn't want to evolve from like agriculture, and then Jim Crow was passed because people were saying no, like you freed our slaves, like it's not good, we want our privileges back, like we don't want them to be equal, or like our economy is going to suffer. So Jim Crow laws, there is bills passed to control people from drinking alcohol. It's always about like this resistance to change first, and then going into big change. The problem is that between like this bill and the moment we say freedom, there's going to be this spiritual adaptation that people have to go through. Like the energetic truth is that some people are still here and not here. And they need to choose to be here. And so if we see that human beings have a tendency to have a lot of resistance until they're in the life of death or death situation before they change, obviously there's going to be a part of the energy of a population that is still going to be here. You know, and I think it manifested like that in the US because of culture, because of like the separation of states, because it prioritizes individuals and not society as a collective first. But we do have these experiences in other countries, and maybe we have different types of upheaval. It's just that maybe the US is so extreme, but I feel like there's also a thing that when it's going to be healed, as it's going to be an example as well, because obviously we can't deny that even with all these problems, like the US are a leader in terms of energy, in terms of politics. So I don't know, maybe there's a plan there.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention too, because this, what you're saying, Irene, about that brought up how there was, I don't remember, there was this African-American athlete who was being asked a question by some like Iranian journalist, and a lot of countries that have been like anti-US positioned, like the Soviet Union was huge on this, but that's like huge hypocrisy for them too, to say this to the US and anyone. But they would, anyway, the journalist said, how do you feel like representing a country that discriminates against, your people? Like, it's a racist country, because, that's like the line that they always say. And then he was like, well, our country isn't perfect, but no country isn't the important right now. And the important thing is that we have progress and we're moving forward on this, and choosing to move forward and choosing to heal it, and it was what made the difference. And I was like, I feel like that is true. Like, I feel like that is what matters the most.
I would say as a Black person, this response was very divine, because I remember Jeff saying that the problem in terms of like DNA patterns for African people and African Americans is that they feel out of society and they need to claim their place in society. So what this athlete was doing was claiming his place in society. He's not representing the country as a racist country and being shameful about his country. He's saying like, by winning, I'm claiming my power as a citizen of the country, and my power is going to impact consciousness because my consciousness is going to expand and give healing to people. And I feel that's the spiritual truth. Probably a lot of journalists in the Soviet Union and ex-Soviet Union do a lot of reporting based on separation, so I'm not surprised. But yeah. Good on him for his response. It's good.
Yeah, good on him for that. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about Trump's indictment? I know a little bit less what's going on because it's less mediatized, I feel. Well, the details, at least, are less mediatized. Like, his face is mediatized everywhere in the world.
Oh, yeah.
What's going on?
So I feel like with this case, Donald, the side of Donald Trump and those who support him have been saying this is a witch hunt. That's been a phrase that they've used a lot, which I find kind of funny because it brings to mind Donald Trump in like a witch's gown and pointed hat, because I'm like, why are you using witch, but it's because that's the phrase for like, going after someone who you just don't like. But he's saying like, so the Democrats have been trying to go after him for years and stuff. Well, the thing about him is he's someone who always does his best to violate as many laws as possible for his own advantage. but he gets away with it.
True.
And also sometimes like bending rules can be a good thing sometimes, but also it can be a way that people exploit the system, and he's excellent at doing that. So very skilled in that. But this criminal case against him, I'm not sure about, because there's a whole bunch of things that there's some things that may not be watertight with it. One of them being, so he made hush money payments to 2 women who he had sex with, a doorman who had a bad yet false story about him, and then also made payments to news outlets who wanted to publish damaging stories about him. Okay. So part of the charges is that counts as he was falsifying business records to say these weren't hush money payments, these were legal expenses. So that's fraud, and you're not allowed to do that. So that's the charge. The thing is, so one thing I wasn't sure about is if you pay money to keep people from publishing a bad story about you, does that count as a campaign contribution? Because people are saying that's not being transparent about campaign contributions. And I'm like, that's not really campaign contribution if you're spending your own money to like keep people from publishing about you. And then the second thing was, so he's being charged with felony fraud because it has a longer statute of limitations. So because the statute of limitations for the felony charge would cover, it wouldn't have been too long since he committed the crime. Whereas the non-felony charge, it would be too long since he committed the crime to charge him. But for it to be felony fraud, he has to be lying about the expenditures with the intent to commit another crime. But in the indictment, they didn't specify what the other crime was because they weren't required to. But I'm like, why not, dude? This is kind of irresponsible. Because if you do that, that was my thought, was that they're gonna try to desperately to put this case against him. It won't be legally watertight. It won't work. And then he'll just come out being like, I'm vindicated, fuck the system.
Yeah.
That's what I read on it.
Yeah.
Do you guys, tell me what you guys feel and think.
Yeah. Well, they didn't specify what they were charging him for in that specific case that you were talking about, because I feel like it would have either been used by his lawyers against them, or it would have watered down the credibility of the case even more. Probably what it feels like is that within all these tight frames of time and things it can be judged for, they were trying to judge him they were trying to gatekeep him from coming back on the political system, which is like, okay, well, it's an intention, right? But I feel like it's an intention based on the fear, and I can understand why they did this. Obviously, we all do. But sometimes when it's not time, it's not time. It's like that the guy that like during Black Lives Matter was walking through the city with an assault rifle, and it was white and nobody stopped him, and he was judged, and he was like 18 or 19 or 17, I don't remember, and he wasn't convicted because I feel like probably what would have happened in a case so hot that people were so emotional about it, now that we have like 3 years of reflection behind us to understand it, it's probably that he would have been considered a martyr. And so I feel like Trump is becoming the martyr of people that were already polarized and misunderstanding what was actually going on, and thinking that he he was just protecting their rights. And so I'm just comparing it to how much time it took to convict or indict Jacques Chirac and Nicolas Sarkozy, former presidents of France, who had their good things about them, had their bad things about them, obviously. Some of the cases just finished. Some took 10 to 15 years before they went before justice. So what I feel is like the justice system, as it is right now, it shouldn't be rushed, shouldn't be going through big revolutionary changes. It shouldn't be rushed into making a case of something. It should be taking its time, because sometimes, maybe before we go to divine justice, where people are going to be judged right away, and even then, I don't think they're going to be judged right away. I think they're going to be led with several changes. But in the society that we're in, it's not going to work to try to convict someone right away, as we're seeing. But it was a good try, but still, especially when he's a pro, I think they underestimated how much of a pro he is at using all the loopholes of society. That's what I realized by working for big companies for the past 6 months. Every loophole is going to be used against the people and for, I guess, the enrichment, the development of the rich people or the people that are in charge. And he's a pro at that. Otherwise, he would have been probably incarcerated way before he was president, since with all the things that he did with his businesses before. So you need to take your time. I know a lot of things are sensitive. People are probably angry. I know we were revolted about everything that he did, but choices and karma were not reflected right away into the society. And so we must respect the divine order. And maybe this was not the time, But I hope he's not going to be used as a martyr because of that. So yeah. What are your thoughts? And just deep into thinking.
Yeah, part of me feels like there's some energy of what we were saying earlier, it just seems like someone's lying or there's just some deception. Because, I wonder too, like you said, Sage, is this just kind of just another circus, for him to be like, oh, I was vindicated, I'm great. And I don't know, I thought it was weird that he announced beforehand that he was going to get arrested.
Yeah.
I also agree that it's odd that they didn't fully explain all the charges against him. And I'm just interested in what's actually going to result from it. Is there going to be true justice, as Irene said, or is it just some weird petty sort of thing where people are just trying to bar him from politics, and it's, I don't know, some theatrical sort of, that's what it feels like to me sometimes, just theater, I'm just watching some play. I don't know.
Some of your politicians are very passionate, maybe a bit dramatic on both sides of the spectrum. But I think it's everywhere like that. But there is also a very, very small part, or maybe not such a small part, that we mustn't forget about the time frame. They try they try to frame him. So that's not the right intention. You shouldn't you should want to have divine justice, and divine justice stems from peace. If you're trying to frame him, even if it's just a time frame, it's based on not peace. It's based on fear. So
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't work.
And like, why now? You know, like why? Because no one wants him to be president again. Like, I just, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
is those things when did he pay off the Stormy Daniels woman? Like that was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the statute of limitations only applies to when he was, for the time that he was in New York. So he, like, it's saying like he's been like back and forth, and that time amounts to less than 4 years. So the statute of limitations hasn't expired. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
I spent time reading that to figure it out. Okay, it wasn't easy for my brain. All this legal stuff is just so, it can be so murky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like loopholes, like Irene said, there's just like all these little loopholes where you're like, when you sit and like read about it, you're like, huh, something smells fishy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All loopholes are such a part of our society. I realize that because working in communication and even like close to customer service, it opens up your eyes. Like every loophole is exploited, and so if you don't know how to exploit the loophole, you're going to get effed, basically. But if you do, oh boy, yeah, attack karma goes back to you. But again, like spiritual law is not going to obviously be manifested right away. Otherwise, we would be in like quite a few situations because like every one of our fears and patterns would be manifested right away. So it's compassionate, and we mustn't see it as an injustice. Otherwise, we're going to get the sense that we're victims, and the other camp is sensing that they're being victimized as well. Everyone is going into victim mentality. It's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And it's just, oh boy,
Yeah.
that's what we want. It's just talking about that. It's exhausting. My God, can't even speak English, but yeah, that's a weird little case that we have. Curious to know how this is going to unfold. And yeah, I feel better about talking about it, and I feel like lighter. So I don't feel like if it's not convicting, we're not going to go into the apocalypse. Like it's okay.
Yeah. So
Even if it's re-elected, like there's still God with us. Like we don't need to feel like there's an injustice or that we're abandoned in some ways.
yeah, maybe that's what it's about, because it seems strange that there's been a feeling of like he'll never be held accountable for, like, well, he led the insurrection at the US Capitol in 2021 while he was still president. And he also called the Georgia Secretary of State at the time saying, can you find me some more votes? And both of these things are like something that you should never ever do as the president of your country. It's more of it's just not, but like there's a feeling of almost like denial of that it was even that serious, or wondering if he'll ever possibly be held accountable for that. And I'm curious about that. Maybe we could go into that in the future. But I feel like that is why people are trying to do these other cases, to just do anything to get him to, because nothing seems to stick. Yeah.
They're afraid of like what's next if he were to be
Right.
would be elected.
Yeah.
We can
So
take our power back there.
yeah.
Maybe some people were trying to put him in the bad light as well, in order to have them vote for Democrats in the next elections, but it didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or halfway, I would say. Well, more to come. It's definitely not the end of this case, so we'll have time to probably debrief like everything that's happening. We're already at the hour, so thank you to everyone that watched us live and is watching us from YouTube. We appreciate you participating. And yeah, if you really liked that discussion, don't forget to like it, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see other discussions and the following of this case that we were talking about. So yeah, have a very good day and see you next week. Bye-bye.